sometimes have to get out to get a chance.
One of the things that I think is so inspiring about this great migration and any immigrant experience, which is one thing that binds all Americans together, if you think about it, because we are all here, every last one of us, even Native Americans had to cross the Bering Straits. I mean, someone meaning that we are all descended from people who had to have made a tough decision to leave the only place they'd ever known for a place they'd never seen with no guarantees whatsoever. That means that there's a certain kind of code that they have all left us. And that code was not one in which they looked to leaders to save them, in which they didn't look to whatever leader you might consider it to be. They looked within their hearts, and they decided this is the best thing for us and our family at this time. When it comes to the people who are part of this great migration, their decision was, and they often went completely against the suggestions and the exhortations of their leaders, whether community leader, whether it was minister, whomever it might have been. They defied them in order to make this decision. The decision was this: here, for whatever reasons beyond our control and that precede us by many generations, our work is devalued and our very lives are devalued. Perhaps we will fare better elsewhere. Whatever happened to them wherever they went was going to be based upon all kinds of things that might not be in their control. But they had faith that life might be better and they were going to make that decision on their own. Every migration is a referendum on the place that they're leaving, and one hopes that the place that they leave will be better for their having left. And in fact, I believe that the South is better for this migration having occurred. But ultimately, the message is one of the individual spirit. I mean, I have gained such a sense of faith in the individual spirit that no migration or decision such as this is a wrong one. Those who decided to stay did not make the wrong decision. Those who decided to leave did not make the wrong decision. In other words, when you make a decision from the heart on what's best for you and your children, I think you will make the best decision. Now, that aside, we all are in some ways heirs to a caste system that exists still to this day and can be borne out in the numbers. The numbers are that, connecting the past with the present, if you were an African-American teacher, as my mother had been, and you were teaching in the state of, say, Mississippi or Louisiana, where I know the numbers right off the top of my head. I do not know the numbers in South Carolina during the 1930s and 40s, but they would have been similar. They were making 1/3 of what their white counterparts were making. So you go back to the 1920s and the 1930s, and you have people who are doing the exact same thing. In fact, under maybe more challenging circumstances.
In the 30s, just to give you an example, in the 30s we were spending about $130 per white student in the state of South Carolina, less than $7 per student in the state of South Carolina.
On the black students.
On the black students.
But you know what's discouraging? If you talk about income today, the numbers are just as disconcerting in many ways, that the average African-American male can stand to earn 60% what the average white male can earn in America right now, 2011.
It's actually worse than that, because that teacher working very hard, all teachers work hard, back in the 1930s, would now have grandchildren who would be maybe 20 or 30 years old. And their children, by definition, do not have the same wealth behind them, because their grandmother was not able to make as much as her counterpart.
But there was nothing to leave behind.
There was nothing to leave behind. And of course, she had been descended from people who had not been paid at all for their labor. So you have multiplied by the generations, generation upon generation upon generation of disparity that has to continue even to this day.
The Great Recession has even exacerbated that.
Such that now the net worth of the average African American is 1/10 of that of a white American, and that's mainly because of the compounding. It's a negative compounding of a disparity that goes back many generations. It's all but impossible to make up for in a couple of generations, and that's the reason why one would hope that there would be a sense that all of us would feel a connection to what's going on with our fellow Americans, because we're all affected by them. We all need to have people who are well educated enough to be able to take care of us in our old age.
Or we talk about disparities, and here's one, Steve, you're not a criminal defense attorney, but we talk about the justice system. There are some staggering, astounding numbers with regards to corrections. And I've done programs on this in public television, and the one that caught my interest right off the bat a couple of years ago was in this state, we spend roughly the same amount on corrections as we do in higher education.
Right. That's right. It costs.
That's a value judgment.
It is a value judgment. It costs about $40,000, the last I heard, to keep a young man in jail. And I don't know if you know this, but I mean, between the age of 18 and 30, I think we have over 30% of the African American males in jail right now. So what's happening? What I would tell you this: if you want a safer South Carolina, teach a young man to read.
How much does it cost for Head Start, for instance?
Well,
programs like that are derided in many circles.
Well, and look at what's happening. If you just want to talk about public policy and civil rights in South Carolina, just compare ourselves to Georgia and North Carolina, which are not all-stars by any means, right? But they're so far ahead of us because of the public policy that they've put in place. A case called Leandro in North Carolina brought forward the constitutional right, which we would hope would come out of the Abbeville case, the constitutional right to early childhood education. You take a child such as yourself, whose mother has a college graduate. You probably entered school with about a 30 to 50,000 word vocabulary that you could recognize. Children whose mother dropped out of high school enter school with a 3 to 5,000 word vocabulary because they haven't had a bunch of adult interaction and people haven't been reading to them and so forth along the way. So there's a 30, 40,000 word gap the day they start school, right? That child needs more adult interaction. That means that child needs a smaller classroom. That child needs a teacher who understands how to teach literacy, words, and reading. So if you're going to move this world, if you're going to change, make a change that would be a big intergenerational change, it would be to graduate children from high school. A young man who does not graduate from high school is 8 times more likely than a high school graduate to end up in jail. A child who does not graduate from high school has a 65% chance of ending up on welfare at some point in their life, and a 35% chance of ending up in jail. Now, those overlap. That's not 100%. They happen to add to 100, but that's not the way it works. So I would tell you, if you want a safer, more secure South Carolina with less crime, teach a young man to read and help him graduate from high school. If you want healthier families and healthier babies and longer lives for men, guess what the greatest predictor is for long lives for men and healthy babies? The education of a woman. So the education rate of a woman drives mortality for kids and longevity for men. So if you want a healthier South Carolina, get a young woman to graduate from high school. If you want a more economically productive South Carolina, teach young people math and economics and social sciences and political skills. So take the 40, you're going to pay me now or pay me later.
Pay in the front end or pay in the back end.
That's your point.
It's your choice.
So pay $40,000 to keep a young man in jail at the age of 18 until he's 30 or 35
Or you can
years
pay
old.
$3,000 to $5,000 on the front end to have that child educated.
And to teach the child at, let's start with early childhood education. You said first steps. The program started as a pilot with $18 million. It's now down to 11. For the state of South Carolina, I mean, come on. We are not keeping the covenant with our children. You talk about the biblical type covenant. I view a constitution as a covenant among the people as to how we're going to treat each other. And when we say we will provide every child in the state of South Carolina with an adequate education, then we have to put our resources to doing that. That's where the civil rights of the 21st century have to go.
What you so do unto the least of these, correct? Isabel, before I open it up for questions here, I want to ask you, there is something happening right now in the African American community with Tavis Smiley, well-known public broadcaster. I would consider him a friend of mine. Cornell West, an academic, widely read, quite famous in his own right, challenging President Obama for his policies for the last couple of years. I would say, as somebody involved, or having been involved for many years in public dialogue, there's been a stunning lack of discourse about poverty in America. And it's